Hello, welcome to the second video in the series about objects. In our first video, I created a simple class with a handful of properties, and now we're going to start talking about methods. Now, methods are a lot more complex. There's some syntax that we need to learn, and some of it's really tricky, and it's really only going to make sense when you see a couple examples of methods. I'm not going to write any methods in this video. I'm just going to set the stage for it. And eventually we'll get to the idea of instantiation, because we're talking about creating objects, but it would be good if we could do something with them and test them a little bit. So that's where we're going with this. All right, so a method is just a function. It is just a function that belongs to a class. We even use the same keyword function. So if you have not created functions before in PHP, this is not going to go too well because these are just functions that belong to a class. The only difference between a method and a function is that a method is inside of a class and it's going to need an access modifier, just like your properties, so public, private, protected. Now, magic methods, let me try and discuss this. This is a weird one to get right into, but I don't know when to get into it, so I'll get into it now. Magic methods are the basic methods that every class kind of should have defined. You don't have to define them. You don't have to create a constructor. You don't have to define the toString method. You don't have to use get and set, but they are methods that, generally speaking, do exist for a class, and you'd be well off to think about defining those for your class. There's a whole world. I mean, you could create a method for anything. Those are just the ones that are probably going to be existent in your class, and they have interesting implications. I just want to point to this right here. If you are defining a magic method, you will know you're doing a magic method because it's going to be preceded by 2 underscores. Now, I'm just talking about that in text format because when I type 2 underscores, it doesn't look a whole lot different than 1 underscore. So, 2 underscores means you're doing a magic method. And I also want to point out, like, the toString magic method, it is called toString, but the constructor is called construct, which is kind of annoying. So if you're doing 2 underscores, that means it's a magic method, which is one of those not exactly defined, but like you should define this for your class. All right, so I'd love to go create some methods right now, but there's some pretty nasty syntax that I need to show you. Now, if you've learned about objects in another language, this isn't so nasty, but if you've never learned about objects before, you're not going to like this. All right, I just said this. All right, so I'm literally talking about this. So $this, that is a special, it looks like a variable called this. I mean, that's kind of what it looks like in PHP syntax. It's a special term used to refer to the current instance of the object you're dealing with. I could talk about this for an hour and it wouldn't make any sense, but when I write 3 or 4 functions, I think you'll kind of start to understand what I mean by that. So when you are defining a class, you're going to need to reference the methods and properties of that class, and those methods and properties belong to an instance of an object. You refer to the current instance of an object as this. It's almost worthless for me to talk about, but I'm trying to talk about it before you see it in practice. You'll see a ton of it when we actually start writing methods, but at this point, just understand that this is a special word. And I just hate trying to speak in sentences and not say the word this. It's difficult. All right, and the other thing that you need to know about is this operator here. It's an arrow operator. That is how you reference a property or a method of an object. No $sign before the property. You'll see that when I put it in play. Like down here, here's an example. So this right here, gosh, see, I say this and I'm reading this. This line right here is valid. This is something you would write within inside of a class definition. So you're only going to use that keyword this inside of a class definition. That means whoever the heck I'm talking about, the instance of this object, I want to set its HP to 100. So see that operator here indicating I'm referencing a property of an object. That would mean it's in that. I mean, that doesn't make sense because it's an assignment statement, but that would be a method. That's a property. And then this is just a good old-fashioned assignment statement. So that's the nasty syntax I was referring to. You'll for sure get way better at it when you see me write a couple methods, but for now, just know that that stuff exists. Now, I really can't get going with anything until I start talking about instantiation, and I can't talk much about instantiation without talking much about constructors. When you create an instance of an object, that's called instantiation. When you want to create an instance of an object, you use new. And there's a good chance that you've used new before. You usually write it, and it usually looks something like an assignment statement where it's like, cat equals new cat, or random equals new random. New means I want to create an object of type whatever the thing's after it. So look at this example down here. This is a variable called my cat. I name it whatever I want to call it. Equals new cat. That implies that this thing is an object of type cat. And when you write new means you're calling a constructor. Constructors are what you use to initialize the properties of an object. In the next video, we'll do constructors, and that's where this whole thing will start to actually make some sense. But for now, I just want to show you what instantiation of an object looks like. So back to our code we made last time, right? So I got my player class. So outside of my player class, this is where I create instances of a class. I wanted to go straight to constructors, but constructors don't make much sense without instantiation. So let's say I want to make a player called Ken, and he is a new player. Fine, that's instantiation. I've now got an object of type player, and it's named Ken. And down here, I have a similar thing. So I now have two instances of type player. So the type of Ken is player, type of Sarah is player. So I've got two instances of that object. If I wanted to try to print those out, like print out Ken, this is not going to go well. I'll open up a web browser and run this thing and show you kind of how this goes. Is that this whole thing just doesn't work, and we're going to spend, I don't know, half this series making this work, right? So object of class player cannot be converted to string. Well, objects are complex. You know that. We're defining an object, so you can't print them out like a string because it's not a string. What you could do is try and print out one of the properties, like name. And so there's that arrow operator I was telling you about. So if you want to reference a property of an object, it's that operator. If I wanted to call a method, it would be the same thing. This is not going to work because that's private, but I'll show you it's better. At least I'm trying to print out something which can be resolved to a string at this point. Private property. I mean, you could fix that by going public. Now you probably have all these questions like, well, why'd you make it private? How the heck are we supposed to get at that? Well, don't worry. I'm going to talk about all those things. Oh, so notice my error went away, but nothing happened. That probably seems weird. Well, first of all, I'm going to make that back to private. I just wanted to show you how to make that error go away. The reason that happened is this is not initialized to anything. It's an empty string. So it did print it out, and it just was nothing. So all I was trying to show you here is this is what instantiation looks like. So I created two instances of player. One was named Ken, one was named Sarah. And when you're calling this new right here, this means call the constructor. And in the next video, we'll write the constructor. All right. So we didn't cover a ton of ground here. This is the last of the videos that are going to be mostly text-based. So at this point, I'm pretty much just talking about syntax and things you need to know about. And then from this point forward, we'll start doing cool things that actually get us closer to a solution. So if you've hung in this far, things are about to start to get interesting. Thanks for watching.